Have you ever wondered how the knights of medieval castles slept? Imagine the chill of stone walls, the distant howl of wolves, and the faint flicker of torchlight. Within these ancient fortresses, beneath banners and shields, brave warriors faced not just battle, but the mysteries of the night. Tonight, we step softly into the shadows of history, where every creaking floorboard and whispering wind tells a story of courage, secrets, and the quiet lives of those who bore the armor of kings. The year was 1324, and the kingdom of Aldenmere stretched across rolling hills and dense forests, its borders protected by the might of its knights. High atop a jagged cliff stood Castle Blackthorn, a fortress carved from gray stone overlooking the misty valley below. It was here that Sir Roland, a seasoned knight, had been stationed for over a decade. Known for his unwavering loyalty and unmatched skill with the lance, he had earned the respect of both king and commoner. But even the bravest knight had a secret fear: the long, quiet hours of the night. As dusk fell, the castle's courtyards emptied, and the clang of the blacksmith's hammer faded. The guards retreated to their posts along the battlements, while torches flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sir Roland climbed the spiral staircase to his chamber, the echo of his boots a stark reminder of the solitude that awaited him. Unlike the tales told in bustling taverns, the life of a knight at night was seldom glorious. Sleep was a stranger. Castles, though grand, were drafty and cold. Stone walls absorbed the chill of autumn winds, and the rooms were sparsely furnished with wooden beds topped with rough straw mattresses. The evenings were long, and stories, both true and whispered, filled the air, carried by the servants and young squires who feared the night. Sir Roland lay upon his bed, the weight of chainmail heavy even after it had been removed. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant creak of the drawbridge and the soft footsteps of a rat somewhere beyond the walls. Outside, the wind rattled the arrow slits, and a lone owl hooted across the valley. It was during these quiet hours that secrets often revealed themselves. Not all threats came from enemy swords. Some were shadows, memories of battles fought long ago, and whispers of betrayal within the stone walls. Sir Roland knew that a knight's vigilance never truly ended, not even in sleep. And yet there were moments of strange beauty, too. The moonlight spilling into the chapel, illuminating the dust motes like tiny stars. The distant toll of the bell marking midnight, and the comforting thought of a kingdom safe, for now, because of his watchful presence. Tonight, however, something felt different. The castle seemed almost alive. A cold draft swept across the room, despite the windows being closed. The torchlight flickered as if warning him. Sir Roland rose cautiously, gripping the hilt of his sword. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, and he could swear he heard soft murmurs in the stone corridors. But when he opened the chamber door, the hall was empty, silent, save for the gentle echo of his own footsteps. Little did he know, the coming night would unveil secrets long buried beneath Castle Blackthorn. Hidden passages, messages written in blood-red ink, and the story of knights who had vanished centuries before, leaving behind only whispers of their deeds and the mysteries of how they truly slept alone, with courage and fear intertwined in the quiet of the dark.
The castle grew colder as midnight approached, a stillness settling over the stone walls like a heavy cloak. So Roland returned to his chamber, but could not shake the feeling that the fortress was watching him. The corridors, normally filled with the clatter of armored footsteps, now whispered with silence. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, and even the distant hoot of an owl seemed unnervingly close, almost deliberate, as if it carried messages meant only for those who dared to listen. In a neighboring chamber, young squires prepared for their own nights. Each was tasked with duties that extended beyond the daytime training, polishing swords, tending to the armory, and preparing the steeds for a possible midnight alarm. Their beds were straw-stuffed, often shared with a restless companion, a cat, a dog, or sometimes another squire, to share warmth against the cold stone. Whispered stories traveled among them, tales of knights who had vanished in the dead of night, or of mysterious figures glimpsed along the battlements. These stories, half truth and half fear, shaped the nights as much as any sentry duty. Sir Roland descended to the great hall, where the fire still smoldered faintly in the hearth. Here the echoes of history were tangible. The hall had been witness to countless banquets, councils, and celebrations, but at this hour it was a sanctuary of solitude. The banners that hung from the walls, worn yet proud, fluttered slightly in the cold draught, as if acknowledging the long shadows of those who had walked these halls before. He paused at a narrow doorway leading to a spiral staircase descending into the dungeons. Few ventured there at night, yet something compelled him to check. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps a lingering sense that the past had not yet finished speaking. As he descended, the stone steps groaned under his weight, echoing into the darkness below. Torches mounted on the walls flickered as if startled by his presence, casting moving silhouettes that seemed alive.
In the deepest dungeon chamber, Sir Roland discovered faded inscriptions on the wall, ancient runes nearly worn away by centuries of damp and neglect. The markings were strange, but not entirely unfamiliar to him. Stories of the Brotherhood of the Night Watch had circulated through whispered legends. This secret order, composed of knights sworn to guard the realm against enemies both mortal and unseen, had long since vanished, or so the chronicles claimed. Here, however, evidence remained. A single hollowed recess in the wall contained a scroll sealed with wax. Carefully, Roland broke the seal and unfurled the parchment. The text was cryptic, filled with instructions and warnings for those who were vigilant in the night. It spoke of hidden passageways beneath the castle, secret chambers where supplies and weaponry were kept, and of a code known only to members of the order. But the final lines were chilling. Beware the silence that lingers where shadows breathe, for in the quiet they watch, and those unprepared may sleep forever in the darkness. Chilled, Roland folded the scroll and made his way back to his chamber. Sleep was no longer a simple necessity. It had become a precarious balance between rest and awareness. Outside, the wind howled through the battlements, carrying with it the distant cries of unknown creatures. Even the loyal hounds of the castle stirred uneasily, their ears twitching at sounds imperceptible to the human ear. That night, Roland's dreams were filled with visions of the knights who had come before him, their faces obscured by helmets, their swords glinting in torchlight. They moved silently through corridors, vanished into walls, and sometimes appeared in his chamber, watching. But as he stirred awake, Roland realized these were not just dreams. They were memories embedded in the very stones of Castle Blackthorn, waiting for those who would listen.
As dawn remained hours away, the castle relied on its night watch. Guards, cloaked in the quiet of the shadows, patrolled the parapets. Their eyes scanned the horizon for enemies, but more often it was the castle itself that seemed to test them. Doors would rattle without cause, torches would flare unexpectedly, and in the deepest corners, a faint tapping could be heard, echoing against the stone. Sir Roland, despite being a knight of great repute, joined the patrol. The cold night air bit through his cloak, but he welcomed it. It sharpened his senses. He walked the battlements, eyes scanning the horizon, ears straining for any sound of danger. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the courtyard, revealing every nook and shadow. In the distance, the forest seemed alive, trees swaying though no wind stirred them. It was as if the castle itself were breathing.
Below the walls, Roland could see the stables and the armory. The horses, restless in their stalls, snorted and pawed at the ground, sensing the tension that gripped the fortress. In the armory, weapons gleamed faintly in torchlight, their polished steel reflecting the centuries of preparation for battles fought and battles yet to come. He paused before a long, narrow hallway, a place no one spoke of after dusk. Local legends claimed it was haunted by a knight who had betrayed the crown, doomed to wander forever in chains. Roland's heart beat steadily, but not with fear. He felt a responsibility to uncover these mysteries, to understand the lives of the knights who had walked these halls long before him. He moved carefully, every step measured. The stones beneath his boots seemed to whisper secrets, names, deeds, and warnings. Somewhere in the distance, a faint melody played. It was neither wind nor human. It was the echo of centuries, of laughter, song, and sorrow, all bound within these walls.
The castle at night was more than a structure of stone and mortar. It was a living chronicle. And for those who watched, who listened, and who dared to venture into the quiet, it offered stories more vivid than any by daylight fire. The next night, after the castle had settled into its usual silence, Sir Roland awoke with an uneasy feeling. The torchlight flickered against the stone walls, and the air was heavier than before, carrying a faint, musky scent he couldn't identify. He remembered the scroll from the dungeon, with its cryptic warnings about hidden chambers and secret passageways. Driven by curiosity and duty, Roland donned his cloak and quietly left his chamber. The corridors were silent, the only sound his boots on the cold stone floor. He moved to the oldest part of the castle, where the stone was worn and the mortar crumbled. Here, many of the castle's secrets lay buried. It was said that centuries ago, the original builders had constructed a labyrinth of tunnels beneath the fortress, intended as escape routes or hiding places during sieges.
Roland's fingers traced the rough stone until he found a small, almost imperceptible indentation. Pressing it gently, a section of the wall shifted, revealing a narrow passage. A gust of cold air escaped, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and mildew. With a deep breath, Roland entered. The passage twisted and turned, descending into the depths of the fortress. The walls were damp, and the air smelled of stone and forgotten history. Along the corridor, small niches held remnants of old torches,
now rotted and useless. Here and there, carvings were etched into the walls, names, dates, and cryptic symbols left by those who had walked these tunnels long ago. As he ventured deeper, the passage widened into a small chamber. In its center lay an old wooden chest, bound with iron. Carefully, Roland lifted the heavy lid. Inside were ancient manuscripts, maps of the surrounding lands, and pieces of armor marked with the insignia of knights long dead. Among these items was a small medallion engraved with the sigil of the Brotherhood of the Night Watch, the same secret order mentioned in the scroll. Roland realized that these tunnels were more than escape routes. They were repositories of history, holding the stories of the knights who had served the castle before him. He could almost feel their presence, as if the very stones remembered their footsteps and whispered their secrets into the night.
Back in his chamber, Roland studied the medallion and manuscripts. Each document contained meticulous details about the knights' routines, their duties, and, most intriguingly, their nocturnal rituals. Contrary to popular belief, knights did not sleep in deep, uninterrupted slumber. Their nights were structured, a careful balance of vigilance and rest. A typical night began with the evening watch, where knights patrolled the walls to ensure the fortress remained secure. This was followed by a period of meditation or prayer in the chapel, often accompanied by reflection on the day's events and contemplation of their duties. Only after these rituals could a knight attempt a brief rest. Beds were simple affairs, often shared with a trusted squire or companion. Heavy curtains, furs, and blankets provided some comfort against the cold stone walls, but sleep was rarely deep. It was an art learned over years of discipline, a careful navigation between the need for rest and the responsibility to remain alert. Roland also discovered a surprising detail. Some knights maintained journals where they recorded not only daily events, but also dreams, fears, and visions experienced in the quiet hours of the night. These writings revealed the inner lives of warriors, often filled with longing, doubt, and reflections on loyalty, honor, and mortality. As he read, Roland felt a profound connection to those who had come before him. He understood, for the first time, that a knight's courage was not only tested on the battlefield, but also in the lonely hours when shadows stretched across cold stone walls and the mind wandered into uncertainty.
Word of Roland's nocturnal explorations soon spread among the squires, though none dared speak openly of it. At night, around the small fire in the servants' quarters, tales of vanished knights, strange lights, and mysterious sounds were whispered. These were not stories for amusement. They were warnings, passed down through generations to teach caution and respect for the castle's hidden depths. One squire, Thomas, approached Roland cautiously. "Sir," he whispered, "they say that some knights, the knights who never returned, still walk these halls. They guard the secrets of the castle, appearing only to those who seek what they are sworn to protect." Roland's curiosity deepened. Could it be true that the spirits of knights lingered, bound to the castle by duty, by unfinished business, or by the very stones themselves? He decided to find out. That night, he patrolled the corridors once more, paying close attention to the faintest sounds, the rustle of fabric, the whisper of a footstep, the almost imperceptible sigh of the walls. In the darkness of the chapel, a shadow moved. Roland's heart quickened, but he held his ground. "Who goes there?" he called softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. The shadow paused, then slowly faded into the corner. There was no malice, only presence, like a memory reaching across time. He realized then that the castle itself was alive with stories. Every corner, every stone, every narrow passage held the whispers of knights who had lived, struggled, and died here. To sleep in such a place was to be part of that history, to join in the rhythm of life and death that had been maintained for centuries.
Sir Roland's discoveries in the hidden chamber had ignited a curiosity that refused to be quelled. He returned night after night to study the scrolls, medallions, and manuscripts. Slowly, the story of the Brotherhood of the Night Watch began to reveal itself. This secret order had been founded centuries earlier, in response to threats both internal and external. Unlike regular knights, the Brotherhood's duty was not only to defend the castle, but also to guard its secrets. Their oaths forbade them from revealing the tunnels, the hidden armories, or the messages inscribed on stone. Only those who were deemed worthy or desperate enough to seek the truth could uncover the Brotherhood's knowledge. Roland learned that the Brotherhood's knights were structured with almost ritualistic precision. Hours were divided between patrol, meditation, study of ancient texts, and periods of silent observation. Sleep was a luxury to be measured and monitored. A knight who overslept might fail to notice an intruder or a hidden danger lurking in the shadows. The manuscripts described strange nocturnal exercises. Knights moving silently through corridors with candles extinguished, listening to the wind and the walls, mapping sounds and shadows in their minds. These exercises were said to sharpen not only their senses, but also their understanding of the castle itself, as if the fortress were a living entity that could be read like a book. One particularly cold night, Roland was walking the battlements when he noticed something unusual. A figure, cloaked in shadow, appeared briefly at the edge of the courtyard. He drew his sword, yet the figure vanished before he could approach. Only the footprints in the frost remained, leading toward the hidden passage he had discovered days before. Roland followed, descending into the tunnels beneath the castle. The walls seemed to breathe in the dim torchlight, the air thick with centuries-old dust and secrets. Deep within, he found another chamber, smaller than the previous one, with inscriptions that glowed faintly in the torchlight.
The symbols were strange, some resembling the medallion he had found, others entirely foreign. As he traced them with his fingers, a sudden chill ran through him. From the shadows, a whisper drifted, so soft he could barely hear it. "The watch never sleeps, and neither should you." For a moment, he questioned his own senses. Was it the wind, a trick of his imagination, or had he truly encountered the presence of the ancient knights, bound eternally to their duty? He understood then that the castle at night was a bridge between the past and present. The knights of old had left behind not just records, but guardianship that transcended life itself. To walk these halls, to sleep here, to observe the night, these were acts that connected him to centuries of vigilance and loyalty. Sleep, when it came, was fleeting and filled with visions. Roland found himself dreaming of battles long past, the clash of swords, the cries of soldiers, the banners fluttering against the night sky. But in these dreams, the boundaries between time and space blurred. He saw knights he had never met, their eyes fixed on him with knowing intensity, guiding him toward passages, keys, and hidden doors he had yet to discover. The manuscripts had warned him, the mind of a knight was never truly at rest, and dreams were as much a duty as the patrol. Observing these visions became a form of learning, a silent communion with those who had walked before him. He began recording his own observations, creating a journal in the same style as the manuscripts he had found. Each entry detailed not only his discoveries, but also the sensations of the night. the way the stone walls hummed, the shifting of shadows, the faint scent of herbs or candle smoke carried by unseen drafts. Over time, his journal became a map of both the castle and the human mind, a guide for any future knight who might follow. As the nights passed, Roland's exploration led him to the deepest parts of the castle. Here, below the dungeons, he uncovered an enormous vault, sealed for centuries. Its doors were engraved with symbols that matched those in the manuscripts, a protective code only understood by the Brotherhood. Inside, he found relics of the past, ceremonial swords, shields embossed with forgotten crests, armor worn thin by age but preserved by care, and scrolls detailing the lives and deeds of knights whose names had been lost to time. Some scrolls even hinted at forbidden knowledge, alliances with neighboring kingdoms, secret strategies, and hidden treasures. But perhaps the most fascinating discovery was a room arranged for meditation, filled with faintly glowing runes. It was here that the Brotherhood had conducted their spiritual and mental exercises, preparing not just for physical battles, but for moral and ethical challenges, for moments when a knight's heart and mind would be tested in ways the battlefield could never simulate. Roland understood then that sleep, patrols, dreams, and meditation were all intertwined. The castle's knights were designed to train the body, sharpen the mind, and strengthen the spirit. A holistic regimen maintained across generations, now silently passed on to him. One night, as Roland patrolled the castle's corridors, he discovered evidence of knights who had disappeared long ago. Their chambers, once orderly, were now frozen in time, beds unmade, armor still polished, weapons carefully placed as if the owners had simply stepped away. A chill ran through him as he realized that the castle kept memory of those who vanished, their presence lingering like a shadow. He traced the paths they would have walked, following faint scratches on the stone floors, hidden keys in crevices, and markings on the walls that corresponded to the medallions he had found. Each clue painted a picture of knights performing their duties, even when unseen, maintaining vigilance and protecting secrets that could not be shared. Some manuscripts described mysterious disappearances in haunting detail. Knights would leave on patrol and never return, only for their armor or journals to be found decades later. The Brotherhood, it seemed, had always understood that the castle itself demanded loyalty and sometimes sacrifice. Roland began to question, was the castle alive in some way, guiding knights, shaping destinies and preserving history through absence as much as presence? Each night, as he traced the vanished knight's footsteps, he felt connected to a lineage that transcended life itself. In a chamber beneath the Great Hall, Roland discovered messages inscribed in nearly invisible ink, preserved under centuries of dust. The writing contained instructions, warnings, and codes used by the Brotherhood. It became clear that these messages were not merely for communication. They were tools of education, designed to teach discipline, vigilance, and moral judgment. One message stood out. He who sleeps without thought may awaken in peril. Trust the walls. Trust the shadows. Only the vigilant understand. Roland realized that the castle itself functioned as a teacher. Each stone, each corridor, each shadow was an element of instruction. The knights had created a living system, using architecture and the passage of time to instill wisdom in those who could read the silent lessons.
As he studied further, he found diagrams of the hidden passages and tunnels, their purpose clear: escape during siege, secret movement during times of espionage, and preservation of knowledge for future generations. Every night became an exploration, every quiet moment a chance to learn the language of the castle and its ancient guardians.
The manuscripts also revealed stories of alliances that were never recorded in official chronicles. Knights had formed secret pacts, sometimes with neighboring kingdoms, sometimes with merchants or scholars, to protect the realm in ways beyond combat. These alliances were clandestine, necessary for survival, and maintained only under the cover of night. Roland found records of meetings in hidden chambers, exchanges of rare manuscripts, and strategies discussed in whispers. The Brotherhood's discipline extended beyond battle. It was about preserving wisdom, culture, and life itself. He began to understand that the castle's nights were more than a period of rest. They were a time of learning, diplomacy, and moral testing. Even within the discipline and secrecy, human emotion thrived. The manuscripts contained letters, sometimes hidden behind loose stones or within the seams of armor, revealing the secret loves of knights. Forbidden romances, tender friendships, and moments of vulnerability existed alongside duty. Roland read a letter from a knight to his beloved, describing the longing felt during patrols, the warmth of a brief touch, and the promise of return. These human stories reminded him that knights were not mere soldiers, they were men, balancing the weight of responsibility with the desires of the heart. The castle at night, with its whispers and shadows, became a silent witness to these emotions, preserving them through centuries like the stone walls themselves. Roland felt a kinship with these long-gone souls, understanding that courage was not only measured by skill in battle, but also by the capacity to love and remain loyal, even when unseen.
Weeks passed, and Roland continued his nightly explorations. Eventually, he understood the ultimate purpose of the Brotherhood: to teach, to guard, and to preserve. The castle was a living chronicle, and the knights were its keepers. Sleep was not merely rest, it was vigilance, meditation, and communion with history. One night, as Roland sat in the hidden chamber, he reflected on all he had learned: the vanished knights, the hidden messages, the secret passages, the alliances, and the human stories interwoven with duty. He realized that every element of castle life, every patrol, prayer, and shadow, was a lesson. He closed his eyes and felt the weight of centuries around him. The castle hummed softly, the stones resonating with memories. For the first time, Roland slept peacefully, not because he was safe, but because he understood the rhythm of the night, the quiet lessons of the walls, and the silent watch of the Brotherhood. And as he drifted into sleep, the castle whispered, "You are not alone. You are part of the eternal watch." Roland began to notice that every element of Castle Blackthorn's architecture was designed to influence life at night. Narrow hallways forced careful steps, reducing the chance of sudden noise. Arrow slits allowed guards to observe the surrounding lands even while remaining almost invisible. Spiral staircases wound in ways that slowed attackers, but also forced knights to remain alert during patrols. He realized the castle itself was a teacher, its structure a silent instructor guiding knights to vigilance. Sleeping arrangements were no accident. Rooms in higher towers were colder and draftier, training knights to endure discomfort. Chambers near the armory allowed quick access to weapons, reinforcing readiness. Even the placement of windows, corridors, and hidden doors encouraged observation, attentiveness, and strategic thinking. At night, as he moved through these corridors, he felt the design's subtle influence. His senses sharpened. He could detect a shadow shifting in a distant hallway, hear the faintest draft of air signaling an open arrow slit, and feel the vibrations of footsteps across the stone floors. Sleep was not just rest here, it was preparation.
Every evening, the knights followed rituals that connected them to both the castle and each other. The day ended with the toll of the bell echoing across the stone walls. Knights would perform a ritual of inspection, checking weapons and armor, ensuring that every sword was sharp, every chainmail link intact. Then came meditation. In small chapels or hidden chambers, knights prayed or contemplated the day's events. Some meditated silently. Others wrote in journals about what they had seen, learned, or feared. These practices were meant to sharpen the mind as much as the sword, to train the heart to endure both loneliness and uncertainty. Finally, the knights would sleep in staggered patterns. Not all rested at once. Some kept watch, their eyes scanning corridors or battlements, while others lay quietly in rooms nearby. The rhythm of the night, patrols, meditation, rest and observation was meticulously orchestrated to ensure that Castle Blackthorn was always guarded, that secrets were preserved, and that the wisdom of centuries was passed along silently, like a whispered lullaby through stone walls. Roland began to encounter figures in the night, sometimes squires practicing stealth, sometimes shadows that seemed almost human but vanished before they could be approached. One evening, as he descended a spiral staircase into the dungeons, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Turning sharply, he saw a faint silhouette holding a lantern. "Sir Roland," a voice whispered. It was Thomas, the young squire who had first spoken of the vanished knights. "Yes, Thomas. Stay close," Roland whispered.
Together, they explored a newly discovered passage. The walls were covered with cryptic carvings, names, dates, symbols of the Brotherhood. Thomas traced them with trembling fingers. "They are watching, aren't they?" he asked. "Yes," Roland said quietly. "Not in malice. They are reminding us that the castle never forgets. Every shadow is a memory. Every step is history." They pressed onward, discovering a small chamber containing remnants of knights' belongings, boots worn thin, daggers with initials carved into the hilts, and journals detailing daily life, fears, and dreams. For Roland, this was a revelation. The knights' lives extended far beyond battlefields, intertwined with solitude, vigilance, and nightly reflection. As the nights wore on, Roland understood that the castle taught lessons not only about survival, but also about humanity. Courage was not just facing an enemy, it was facing fear in the dark, uncertainty in hidden passages, and the weight of centuries of history. He began to record everything meticulously in his own journal: patrol routes, nightly discoveries, the patterns of shadows, and the whispering memories of vanished knights. Each entry became part of the ongoing story, a contribution to the eternal record maintained by the castle itself. The Brotherhood's legacy was clear. Sleep, vigilance, reflection, and courage were intertwined. By learning the rhythms of the night, Roland was joining an unbroken chain, a silent fellowship stretching back centuries. One night, as a storm raged over the valley, lightning illuminating the battlements in fleeting bursts of silver, Roland ventured into the deepest tunnel yet. The wind howled through cracks in the stone, echoing like voices from another time. At the end of the tunnel, he found a chamber he had never seen before. Symbols glowed faintly on the walls, forming patterns that seemed almost alive. In the center lay a stone pedestal, holding a book bound in weathered leather.
Opening it, Roland discovered the final message of the Brotherhood. The watch is eternal. To understand the night is to understand oneself. Guard what is sacred, honor what is hidden, and sleep with eyes open to history. In that moment, Roland felt a profound connection to the nights of the past, the castle's secrets, the hidden passages, the nightly rituals, and the whispered legacies. All of it was part of a continuum. Sleep, vigilance, courage, and reflection were not just duties, they were a way of life. That night, Roland did not merely sleep. He became part of the story, part of the eternal watch, cradled in the silent embrace of Castle Blackthorn and the wisdom of centuries past. As dawn remained hours away, the castle's quieter areas came alive in subtle ways. Servants moved silently, carrying water or tending to small tasks long before the first light of morning. Squires tiptoed along corridors, polishing weapons or carefully arranging armor in the armory. Their footsteps were soft, almost ritualistic, each movement part of the nightly rhythm that had persisted for generations.
Sir Roland observed them silently from the battlements. He noted the discipline in their motions, the careful attention to even minor details. Each task, though mundane in daylight, took on a ceremonial significance at night. Everything in Castle Blackthorn followed an unspoken order, a choreography designed to maintain readiness and preserve the integrity of centuries-old secrets. Even the kitchens had their quiet rituals. Fires smoldered in stone hearths, the aroma of bread and roasted meats faint but comforting. Night workers, usually overlooked during the day, ensured that supplies were ready for the coming morning. Roland realized that life in the castle was a tapestry of small, deliberate acts, each contributing to the safety, continuity, and memory of the fortress. Roland soon discovered that the castle's secret chambers were not solely repositories of history. They were meeting places for clandestine alliances. Messages hidden within manuscripts described negotiations with neighboring lords, covert planning for defense, and discreet exchanges of intelligence. These activities were conducted under the veil of night, away from the prying eyes of outsiders, and sometimes even the king. One night, Roland stumbled upon a hidden audience chamber, its heavy doors opening into a room lined with faded tapestries. Here, knights and envoys had once gathered to discuss matters critical to the realm's safety. He found journals documenting strategies, lists of allies, and warnings about traitors. It was clear that secrecy was vital. Even a single slip could lead to disaster. The castle's architecture supported these covert activities. Hidden staircases, false doors, and soundproof chambers ensured that the right conversations remained private. For the knights, the night was not just a time for sleep or reflection. It was a time for strategy, diplomacy, and careful navigation of political intrigue.
As Roland explored deeper into the castle's labyrinth, he began noticing subtle signs that some knights might have gone further than duty required. Personal journals hinted at secret romances, private alliances, and even moral compromises. These stories, often buried beneath layers of stone and time, revealed a human side to the warriors, their hopes, fears, and desires. He read of a knight who secretly aided villagers during harsh winters, of another who smuggled messages to distant allies, and of lovers separated by duty, yet connected through hidden notes and coded messages. These were small acts of courage and compassion, often invisible to history, but vital to the survival of the castle and its people. Roland realized that the night revealed more than just dangers. It revealed character. How a knight moved silently, how they observed, how they balanced duty with personal conscience. These were the true tests of their courage. Roland began keeping meticulous notes in his journal. He documented patrol routes, shadow patterns, hidden passageways, and unusual phenomena. But he also recorded lessons learned from the past. How courage is measured not by the loud clamor of battle, but by the silent perseverance in darkness. How wisdom comes from observing the quiet details, and how vigilance is intertwined with empathy, patience, and moral strength. These knightly lessons were not merely practical, they were spiritual. Roland felt a growing connection to the knights who would come before him, to the brotherhood of the Night Watch, and to the castle itself. Every stone seemed imbued with memory, every hallway a silent tutor, and every shadow a test of perception.
Through this process, he understood that the castle's purpose was not just defense, but education. A living classroom where each knight offered new insights, challenges, and guidance for those willing to learn. One evening, a violent storm swept across the valley. Lightning illuminated the castle in fleeting flashes, revealing every turret, spire, and battlement in stark clarity. The wind rattled arrow slits and tore through the trees, carrying with it distant howls of wolves. Roland patrolled the battlements, feeling both fear and exhilaration. The storm seemed alive, almost as if it were guiding him to a revelation. As thunder echoed through the stone corridors, he saw a shadowy figure emerge from the depths of the castle, a knight from centuries past, translucent but unmistakably real in the flickering light. "Do not fear," the figure whispered. "The watch continues. Every step you take, every shadow you observe, binds you to the eternal vigilance of this place." Roland felt an overwhelming sense of connection to the past, a realization that the castle was not merely a building, but a living memory, shaped by courage, wisdom, and the tireless watch of countless knights. That night, he slept with a serenity he had never known. The storm raged outside, but within the walls, he was at peace, cradled by centuries of knowledge, discipline, and the silent presence of those who had come before.
The nights at Castle Blackthorn were long, but for Sir Roland, the weight of responsibility grew heavier with each discovery. One evening, he found himself in the old council chamber, poring over manuscripts detailing secret alliances and warnings of betrayal. The texts spoke of knights who had faced impossible choices, loyalty to the crown versus compassion for the innocent, duty versus desire, obedience versus morality. Roland realized that the lessons of the knight extended beyond vigilance. They were tests of character. To be a true knight of the Brotherhood, one had to navigate these moral dilemmas under the pressure of isolation and secrecy. A single misstep could cost lives or compromise the safety of the castle. He remembered Thomas, the young squire, who had once confided in him about a secret mission, delivering supplies to a village threatened by famine, a task forbidden by strict orders, but morally right. Roland understood now that the night was not just a time for sleep, it was a time for decision-making, reflection, and courage in the face of unseen consequences. One night, as the moonlight spilled across the courtyard, Roland observed a strange phenomenon. Shadows moved independently of their sources. Figures, translucent and silent, appeared along the battlements. Knights who had served the castle centuries ago. They moved with purpose, patrolling the walls, examining passages, and checking doors that had long been sealed. Though they were ghostly, Roland felt their vigilance as real as any living knight. These were the spirits of the Brotherhood, bound to Castle Blackthorn by duty, honor, and eternal watchfulness. He realized that the castle's secrets were not merely historical, they were living. Every shadow was a memory, every whisper a lesson. The knights of the past were teaching him still, guiding his steps, testing his perception, and ensuring that the legacy of vigilance continued.
Roland's explorations eventually led him to a hidden chapel beneath the main hall, long forgotten and sealed. The doors were carved with intricate symbols, worn by centuries, but still legible to one who understood their meaning. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of incense and old wood. Faded murals depicted knights in prayer, scholars writing in candlelight, and scenes of everyday castle life. A large stone altar bore inscriptions in Latin, detailing the brotherhood's oaths and the duties of those who would serve the knight. Roland knelt and traced the inscriptions with his fingers. He realized that prayer, reflection, and meditation were as vital as patrols and swordsmanship. The knights of the past had designed a system where every action, every thought, and every period of rest contributed to the perfection of mind, body, and spirit. The castle armory, usually a place of routine maintenance, revealed more mysteries at night. Roland discovered weapons marked with personal sigils, each telling a story of a knight's life, battles fought, and duties fulfilled. Some swords were ceremonial, inscribed with blessings for courage. Others bore scratches and dents, testament to real combat and sacrifice. Among the weapons, he found letters tucked into scabbards and beneath chainmail, recounting clandestine acts of bravery, secret alliances, and the moral choices that defined true knighthood. Each artifact was a lesson, a story, a connection to the past. Roland understood that the armory was more than storage. It was a living record of history preserved in metal and leather, waiting for those who had the patience and courage to read it.
Weeks turned into months, and Roland's understanding deepened. He had explored hidden chambers, studied manuscripts, followed shadowy corridors, and walked in the footsteps of knights long vanished. He had learned the rhythms of the night, the lessons embedded in stone, and the subtle guidance of the spirits bound to the castle. Sleep was no longer merely rest. It was meditation, reflection, and vigilance. Every dream carried lessons. Every shadow was a reminder. Every creaking floorboard a whisper from history. Roland felt himself part of a chain, stretching across centuries, the eternal watch of Castle Blackthorn. He realized that being a knight meant more than swordsmanship and courage in battle. It meant understanding the silent lessons of the night, respecting the wisdom of those who came before, and maintaining the vigilance that ensured the castle, its people, and its secrets endured. As he lay upon his simple straw mattress, the torches casting gentle light across the walls, he finally embraced the rhythm of the castle. The wind whispered through arrow slits, the distant bell tolled faintly, the shadows moved silently. And in that quiet, timeless moment, Roland slept, not as a man alone, but as a knight among countless others, part of the eternal watch. Thomas, the young squire, had grown under Sir Roland's guidance. Knights were his true teacher. Each evening he polished armor, swept corridors, and memorized the castle's labyrinthine passages. But more importantly, he observed shadows, listened for faint creaks, and learned to interpret silence as much as sound.
One night, he discovered a hidden niche behind the chapel altar containing the small chest of letters written by past squires. They recounted their fears, triumphs, and secret reflections on loyalty and courage. Thomas read them by torchlight, understanding that the wisdom of the knight was a heritage passed from knight to squire, a silent lineage of vigilance and virtue. The castle's stone walls seemed alive. At times, Roland could hear faint whispers, unintelligible but persistent, like a language only the knight understood. He realized that these were not ghosts in the traditional sense, but echoes of centuries, footsteps, conversations, and murmurs pressed into the fabric of the stone itself. He would pause, placing his hand on the cool wall, letting the vibrations guide his attention. The castle was a teacher, and the knight was the lesson. Each whisper contained a subtle clue about hidden chambers, secret passages, or historical events that had shaped the fortress. Winter arrived, blanketing the valley and the castle in snow. The courtyards became frozen stillness, and the torches cast long, stark shadows over icy stone. Patrols were treacherous, footsteps cracked over frozen ground, announcing the presence of even the quietest night. Roland and Thomas navigated the courtyard carefully, their boots slipping slightly on frost. Despite the chill, the night offered clarity. The frozen silence amplified small sounds, distant wolves howling, the cracking of ice, the faint hum of wind through battlements. These nights taught patience, observation, and careful timing, skills as important as swordsmanship for survival in both peace and battle.
Deep beneath the castle, Roland discovered a long-forgotten library, its shelves bowed under centuries of neglect. Scrolls, manuscripts, and books chronicled the history of Aldenmere, the lives of knights, and forgotten lore. By torchlight, he read tales of battles, diplomacy, and heroic deeds. More importantly, the texts revealed lessons in morality, strategy, and leadership. Knowledge intended for those willing to wake before dawn and walk in silence through history. The library was not just a collection of books, it was a classroom where time itself taught through written word and patient observation. Roland found a chamber dedicated entirely to meditation. Faint carvings on the walls depicted knights in various poses of reflection, prayer, and study. Candles were arranged in geometric patterns, casting soft light on stone floors. Here, knights practiced focus, mindfulness, and mental discipline. Sleep was considered part of this ritual, not merely physical rest. A brief, conscious nap allowed the mind to recharge while remaining attuned to the environment, ready to awaken instantly if danger appeared. Roland began practicing this method, learning to sleep lightly, dream clearly, and awaken with purpose, a technique perfected over centuries. One stormy night, Roland and Thomas detected a subtle disturbance in the castle. Footsteps echoed where none should have been. Shadows flickered unusually along the corridor walls. Following their instincts, they discovered an intruder, a spy seeking information about the castle's defenses.
The intruder fled into hidden tunnels, but Roland's knowledge of the passages allowed him to corner the figure. He realized that the lessons of the night, patience, observation, and knowledge of the castle were more powerful than brute force. The spy was captured without a single swing of a sword, proof that vigilance and strategy were as vital as combat skill. The chapel became a focal point for reflection. Roland spent hours examining inscriptions, symbols, and artifacts. Knights had long used these spaces for silent prayer, ethical reflection, and contemplation of their duties. He discovered that sleep,
meditation, and patrols were part of a continuum. The night's quiet allowed both body and mind to strengthen, ensuring that a knight could act decisively at any moment. Each hour of darkness was intentional, structured, and meaningful, a rhythm maintained over centuries. Winter deepened, and the battlements became treacherous. Snowdrifts blocked paths, and gusts of icy wind tested the endurance of every knight. Roland and Thomas navigated carefully, learning to use the moonlight to gauge distances and shadows to detect movement. The frozen nights reinforced lessons in observation, adaptability, and mental resilience. Even in silence, the castle communicated with them, teaching subtle nuances of awareness that could only be learned through repeated nocturnal experience.
Roland discovered a chamber where the Brotherhood once convened in secrecy. Plans were made, strategies devised, and alliances forged, all under the cover of darkness. The chamber's design, soundproof, hidden, and labyrinthine, ensured that sensitive discussions remained private. He imagined the knights of old moving silently, exchanging information critical to the kingdom's survival. The chamber was more than a meeting space. It was a training ground for ethical judgment, decision-making, and quiet courage. The dungeons, often feared, became a place of insight. Roland noticed inscriptions carved by knights and prisoners over centuries, lines of poetry, moral reflections, and warnings. Even in the depths of the castle, the lessons of vigilance, morality, and courage persisted. By observing the dungeons at night, Roland learned patience, empathy, and the importance of understanding the unseen. The past was alive in stone, ink, and shadow, teaching lessons that no daylight could convey. Every corridor became a classroom. Roland practiced walking silently, observing subtle signs, the faint crackle of torches, the rustle of fabric, the sway of banners in the breeze. Candlelight revealed hidden symbols, patterns, and imperfections that conveyed history. He realized that the knight trained perception. A knight who could see, hear, and interpret small details would always hold an advantage, whether facing human foes or navigating moral dilemmas.
On the longest night of the year, Roland observed the castle in complete darkness, save for moonlight reflecting off snow-covered roofs. He patrolled all sections, battlements, courtyards, hidden tunnels, and felt the rhythm of the fortress as never before. Every creak, whisper, and shadow told a story. He understood that the castle's lessons were cyclical. Every season, every storm, and every quiet night was part of a continuum that maintained knowledge, vigilance, and wisdom across generations. One night, a section of the castle seemed to shift. A familiar corridor appeared different, leading to a small hidden chamber Roland had never seen. Inside were artifacts from knights whose names were lost to history, journals, weapons, and personal items. He realized that the castle preserved history in layers, accessible only to those attentive enough to notice subtle changes. The knight, in this way, became a treasure hunt of knowledge, a series of lessons hidden in plain sight. Roland discovered letters tucked into armor, behind tapestries, and in hidden niches. They spoke of lost love, moral dilemmas, and heroic deeds. The letters were intimate, human, and timeless, revealing that even the bravest knights faced vulnerability, longing, and fear. The knight preserved these stories, teaching empathy, patience, and resilience. Roland understood that knowledge of history was incomplete without understanding human hearts.
High above the castle, Roland climbed the watchtower. From this vantage, he could see the valley.
the forests, and distant settlements. The wind howled, and snow drifted across the battlements, but he felt connected to the land, the castle, and the knights who had gone before. The tower symbolized vigilance. From here, a knight could observe the world while remaining part of the fortress, balancing perspective with duty, reflection with readiness. Roland noticed that his dreams had become more vivid and instructive. In sleep, he saw visions of past knights, their faces obscured by helmets, guiding him through hidden passages, showing him secret codes, and teaching him moral lessons. He realized that the castle itself communicated through dreams, merging past and present, guiding the living to understand the principles of the brotherhood. Sleep was now a tool of learning as much as rest. The castle at night created a rhythm of sound, the creak of floorboards, the wind through battlements, the distant howl of animals, the soft murmur of torches. Roland learned to interpret these sounds, understanding the health of the castle, the movements of its inhabitants, and the subtle changes in its structure. This nightly symphony became a form of meditation, sharpening senses and deepening his connection to history.
Beneath the armory, Roland discovered an archive containing documents never recorded in the kingdom's official history. These detailed espionage, diplomacy, and forgotten acts of bravery. The documents revealed the hidden side of knighthood, strategy, moral courage, and discretion. He realized that understanding history required patience, attentiveness, and a willingness to explore hidden corners. The knight preserved what daylight might forget. Roland now comprehended the Brotherhood's purpose fully. It was not only about vigilance, defense, and combat. It was about cultivating wisdom, moral strength, and connection to history. Every patrol, meditation, and careful observation contributed to this legacy. He felt a deep sense of responsibility. The knowledge and lessons of the past must continue, preserved and passed on to those willing to observe, learn, and protect. Roland's final reflection in this chapter came on a calm winter night. He lay in his chamber, the torches flickering softly. The castle hummed with history, memory, and quiet life. He understood that sleep was intertwined with vigilance, reflection, and legacy. As he drifted into a peaceful slumber, he felt the presence of knights past and present, guiding him, teaching him, and sharing the eternal watch of Castle Blackthorn. The night was no longer empty. It was full of life, lessons, and whispers from centuries gone by.
The winter months had deepened into a harsh cold, with snowdrifts piling high against the outer walls of Castle Blackthorn. Sir Roland, now seasoned in the castle's nightly rhythms, was walking along the eastern battlements when he noticed something unusual. The old scrolls and manuscripts he had been studying indicated a siege that had been almost entirely erased from history. The records were fragmentary, torn maps, faded letters, and brief notes scrawled by anonymous knights, but the story hinted at a sudden attack by an unknown enemy centuries ago. Intrigued, Roland descended into the deepest sections of the castle, where tunnels carved into the rock itself wound in labyrinthine patterns. These were passages designed for rapid movement, escape, or the relocation of vital supplies during emergencies. As he traced the corridors, he imagined the knights of the past moving silently, weapons in hand, responding to the chaos that must have erupted in the dead of night. The manuscripts described how the invaders had scaled walls under cover of darkness, only to be repelled by hidden archers and secret battlements unknown to the attackers. The defenders had used every advantage of the castle's architecture,
from spiral staircases that slowed foes to narrow corridors where even the bravest enemy could be easily trapped. Roland felt a shiver of awe at the cleverness and courage of the knights who had once walked these same floors. In one of the hidden chambers, he discovered journals from knights who had participated in the siege. Their entries were raw, honest, and sometimes frighteningly personal. One scribe wrote of sleepless nights, of fear that gnawed at the edges of courage, and of the quiet resolve that allowed him to stand watch even as the sounds of battle echoed through the walls. Another described the strain of moral decisions, whether to risk lives in counterattack or preserve the strength of the garrison for a more strategic moment.
Roland spent hours reading these accounts, realizing that the castle itself had become a silent repository of courage and strategy. The siege was not just a tale of combat, it was a story of human endurance, leadership, and the intertwining of duty with morality. He noted how knights had relied on hidden passageways to communicate silently, how squires carried messages under snow and ice, and how the castle's defenses had been as much psychological as physical. The winter night outside was still and silent, but within the stone walls, Roland felt the pulse of history. He closed his eyes, imagining the knights moving like shadows, their eyes keen, senses sharp, hearts steady. The air seemed to carry the echoes of clashing steel and whispered commands. He realized that understanding the siege required more than reading, it required feeling, inhabiting the night as they had, experiencing the tension, fear, and quiet heroism that defined the event. Returning to his chamber, Roland carefully transcribed the journals into his own records, expanding upon the lessons embedded in those nights. The siege became more than a forgotten historical footnote. It was a vivid classroom teaching strategy, vigilance, and the resilience of the human spirit. For Roland, the night had once again proven its value, not merely as a time for rest, but as a space where history spoke directly, guiding those willing to listen. As he lay down to sleep that night, the castle seemed to breathe around him, alive with the memory of the siege. The torches flickered softly, shadows danced across the walls, and Roland felt a profound connection to the knights who had stood watch centuries before. Sleep came gently, infused with awareness, as if the lessons of courage and vigilance would continue to shape him even in dreams.
The night air in Castle Blackthorn carried a strange resonance that evening. A deep, almost melodic hum that drifted through the corridors like a living memory. Sir Roland had grown accustomed to the many nocturnal sounds of the castle, the wind moaning through the arrow slits, the soft crackle of torches, the distant rhythm of waves beating against the cliff far below. But this sound was different. It was subtle, almost human, and it came from the oldest part of the keep, the Whispering Hall. Few knights ventured there at night. The hall had been sealed and reopened many times across generations, its purpose lost to most of the current inhabitants. Some said it was once a chamber of council, where knights gathered to share secret strategies. Others whispered it was a vault of confessions, where knights laid bare their guilt and regrets, letting the walls absorb their sorrow. Roland, drawn by curiosity and that quiet resonance, decided to find the truth. He lit a single lantern and descended the narrow spiral stairway, each step echoing faintly. The air grew cooler, touched by the scent of age, dust, iron, and faint traces of wax from candles long melted away. When he reached the bottom, the corridor opened into a long, arched hall, lined with stone pillars. Every surface was engraved with symbols, words, and phrases in Old Latin and Norman script, prayers, oaths, and fragments of names. As Roland walked deeper into the hall, he realized that the strange sound he had heard was not an illusion. The walls themselves seemed to murmur. It was not quite speech, but something between sighing and chanting, a continuous low tone that wavered as he passed. He paused, placing his hand on the cold stone. To his astonishment, the vibrations pulsed faintly beneath his palm. Then he saw it. Carved deeply into the center wall, a massive relief depicting a circle of knights kneeling around a central flame. Beneath it, an inscription read, "In silence, truth is spoken. In darkness, honor is tested." Roland felt the meaning wash over him. The Whispering Hall had been designed as a sanctuary, a place where knights could face their conscience without fear of judgment. In these walls, their words were preserved, not in writing, but in sound. The hall itself, with its strange acoustics, had recorded centuries of whispered confessions, blending them into a perpetual echo of the human soul.
He imagined the countless voices of the past, knights confessing their doubts before battle, commanders mourning soldiers lost, men torn between duty and compassion. Their whispers had seeped into the stone, lingering like memories too sacred to fade. Kneeling before the central relief, Roland whispered softly, "I too am part of your watch." His voice joined the murmuring harmony, and for a brief moment he thought he heard a response, a faint chorus of approval, like a sigh of welcome from the centuries. The lantern's light flickered as if stirred by unseen movement. Roland remained there, eyes closed, listening to the endless whispering, each tone a fragment of courage, sorrow, and reflection. It struck him that every knight who had ever stood guard at Blackthorn had in some way spoken here, whether in words or in silence, and those whispers now formed the moral foundation of the castle itself. When he finally rose to leave, the murmurs seemed to soften, fading into a lull that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. He ascended the stairs slowly, feeling both humbled and renewed. The hall had not just revealed its secret, it had reminded him that true vigilance extended inward, that knights must not only guard walls, but also the truth within their own hearts. Back in his chamber, Roland extinguished his lantern and gazed out over the moonlit courtyard. The snow had stopped falling, and the world lay wrapped in silence. Yet, beneath that silence, he could still feel the resonance of the Whispering Hall, a deep, eternal hum that reminded him of the unseen threads connecting all who had ever served within these walls. And when he finally closed his eyes, his dreams were filled with soft voices, ancient, wise, and kind, guiding him through the endless night.
Snow had blanketed the castle for weeks, muffling every sound and making the nights seem longer than ever. The moonlight lay heavy on the ramparts, reflecting off the frost-covered stones like pale silver. Sir Roland, wrapped in his heavy cloak, wandered through the north wing, drawn by a rumor he had heard from the steward, a whisper of an ancient library buried beneath the castle's chapel, sealed off after a tragic fire centuries ago. The story claimed that the library held books forbidden by the church, manuscripts that chronicled not only the castle's history, but also the unseen aspects of knighthood, the codes of silence, secret rituals, and truths too dangerous to be written openly. Some said the knights who once kept the library had vanished overnight, leaving behind only the faint smell of burnt parchment and the echo of turning pages. Roland's curiosity had grown unbearable. He had already discovered the Whispering Hall and glimpsed the moral heart of the Brotherhood. But something told him this library was the mind, the intellect that guided the knights through centuries of change. He decided to find it. The chapel was silent when he entered, its tall windows glimmering with moonlight. The altar stood solemn and bare, yet one carving caught his attention. A small griffin etched into the base, wings outstretched, claws gripping an open book. He pressed against it gently, and to his astonishment, the stone shifted with a soft click. Beneath the altar, a narrow stairway spiraled downward into darkness. Lantern in hand, Roland descended. The air grew stiller and colder with each step, thick with dust and the faint scent of ink and parchment. When he reached the bottom, he found himself in a vast chamber filled with shelves that stretched into the shadows. Thousands of volumes rested there, their bindings worn, their titles nearly illegible. Yet despite their age, the place felt alive. The air hummed with a quiet energy, as though the books themselves remembered being read. Roland walked slowly, running his fingers along the spines. He saw treatises on war, philosophy, astronomy, and faith, all handwritten, some illuminated with gold leaf. One book drew his attention immediately, De Noctibus Custodiae, on the Nights of Vigilance. It was bound in black leather and sealed with wax bearing the emblem of the Brotherhood.
Breaking the seal carefully, he began to read. The manuscript described the inner life of knights, their mental discipline, their dreams, their nightly prayers. It told of the second sleep, a period when knights would awaken in the middle of the night to reflect, write, or pray before returning to rest. The text spoke of visions that came during these hours, guidance from ancestors, and insights that shaped battles and treaties alike. The book also revealed something astonishing. Castle Blackthorn had once been part of a network of fortresses, all connected by the Brotherhood's secret correspondence. Each castle held a library of shadows, where knowledge was preserved away from political corruption. Many of these libraries had been destroyed or hidden after a great schism within the order, one that split the Brotherhood into those who pursued wisdom and those who pursued power. Roland closed the book slowly, realizing the weight of what he had found. This was not just a library, it was a sanctuary of truth, a monument to knowledge suppressed by fear and ambition. He understood now why the knights had guarded these secrets so fiercely, and why the Brotherhood's teachings emphasized humility. Power, without understanding, could destroy kingdoms. As he prepared to leave, his lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows across the shelves. For a moment, he thought he saw figures moving between the stacks, silhouettes of hooded scholars, their heads bowed in eternal study. The air grew warmer, and he heard faint whispers, snatches of Latin phrases, the rustle of pages turning, the soft clink of ink pots. Roland bowed his head respectfully. Your knowledge endures, and I will keep your watch. When he climbed back to the chapel, the dawn was breaking. The snow outside shimmered like glass, and the first rays of sun spilled through the stained glass windows. Yet beneath that peace, Roland carried a new understanding. The true strength of the knight was not in his sword, but in his mind, the quiet courage to seek truth in the dark. He extinguished his lantern, but the light of the hidden library burned on in his thoughts, illuminating the long night of history within him.
The next night, the wind howled like a restless spirit across the battlements. The snow had melted slightly, turning to a slick layer of ice that made every step treacherous. Sir Roland, still haunted by the discoveries of the hidden library, found sleep impossible. His mind replayed the words of De Noctibus Custodiae, the ancient manuscript that spoke of wisdom hidden beneath stone and silence. But one passage lingered most vividly in his thoughts, an obscure reference to the heart of the watch. The text described it as a relic, neither jewel nor weapon, forged from the breath of dawn and the blood of the vow. The relic, it said, had been entrusted to the first Grand Knight of the Brotherhood and hidden within the castle to protect its people from the blindness of power and the corruption of light. The phrasing was strange, almost poetic, but it stirred something deep within Roland's heart. He needed to know more. Returning to the library beneath the chapel, Roland searched the shelves for any mention of the relic. After hours of reading brittle pages by lantern light, he found a partially burned scroll tucked inside a hollowed-out book spine. The parchment was fragile, but the ink was still legible in places. It spoke of a relic forged during a time of great peril, when the Brotherhood faced internal betrayal. The relic, known as the Heart of the Watch, had been created as a vessel of unity, a symbol of truth and protection. But the scroll also carried a warning. He who seeks the heart must first face the shadow of his own name. Roland frowned. The phrase reminded him of the lessons whispered in the hall, the idea that true vigilance required self-knowledge, the courage to confront one's fears and flaws. Perhaps the relic was not merely a physical object, but something spiritual, a mirror of the knight's inner world. Still, the scroll hinted at a location, a symbol carved into the deepest stones of the castle's foundations, a circle enclosing an eye, marked upon the guardian's chamber. Roland had never heard of such a place. He knew every visible part of the castle, yet its foundations still held secrets. Determined, he set off toward the old armory, where the original builders' tunnels descended beneath the keep. The passages below were narrow and damp, their ceilings low enough to force him to stoop. His lantern cast flickering light across the rough stone. Eventually, he reached a door half buried in rubble, its wood blackened with age. On its surface, carved faintly but unmistakably, was the symbol from the scroll, a single eye enclosed by a circle.
With effort, he cleared the debris and forced the door open. Beyond it lay a small circular chamber. The walls were covered in carvings, names, oaths, and invocations. In the center stood a stone pedestal, and upon it rested a small iron box, its lid sealed by 3 interlocking rings. Roland approached slowly, reverently. When he touched the rings, a faint vibration coursed through his fingertips, like the hum of a living thing. He turned them one by one, each rotation accompanied by a low, resonant tone that echoed through the chamber. When the 3rd ring clicked into place, the lid lifted slightly, releasing a breath of cold air that smelled faintly of incense and metal. Inside lay a heart-shaped crystal no larger than his palm. It glowed faintly from within, pulsing with a rhythm like that of a heartbeat. The light was soft, not blinding, but steady, calm, pure, and almost comforting. Roland felt his own heartbeat align with it. He understood then what the relic represented. The heart of the watch was not power, not magic, but remembrance. It held the essence of all who had ever stood guard in the night, the courage, the doubts, the sacrifices. The knights had poured their faith into it across centuries, binding their spirits to a single enduring symbol. As he gazed upon it, Roland felt an overwhelming peace. The relic was the embodiment of what it meant to be a true knight, to remain steadfast, compassionate, and alert, not only against the world's enemies, but against the weaknesses within oneself. He placed his hand over the crystal, whispering the ancient vow. In darkness I will see. In silence I will hear. In sleep I will remember. The relic pulsed once, then grew dim, as if acknowledging his oath. Roland closed the box and returned it to its pedestal. He knew it was not meant to be taken, only found, rediscovered by those who still carried the spirit of the watch. When he returned to the upper halls, the first light of dawn was breaking through the high windows. The castle seemed to breathe with new life, the torches flickering brighter, the air warmer. And as Roland walked toward his chamber, he knew that the heart of the Brotherhood still beat, quietly, eternally, beneath the stones of Castle Blackthorn.
That night, an unnatural stillness fell over Castle Blackthorn. No wind whispered through the arrow slits, no torch flickered. It was as though the castle itself was holding its breath. Sir Roland, weary but restless, lay awake in his chamber. His mind drifted toward the relic, the heart of the watch, its faint, steady glow still etched behind his eyes. But when he closed them, the quiet deepened into something else. The air thickened. A distant hum rose, low, rhythmic, and hauntingly familiar. It was the same resonance he had felt when he touched the relic. Then, in the darkness behind his eyelids, a voice emerged, soft but commanding. Night of the Watch, do you seek to see as we have seen? Roland's heart quickened. He sat up, looking around, but the room was unchanged. The torches burned steadily. Yet the voice came again, now from everywhere and nowhere. Every guardian must face his shadow. To bear the watch, you must walk where light cannot reach. Before he could respond, the air shifted. The walls of his chamber seemed to dissolve, the light dimming, until only the faint outline of his own body remained. He stood in a vast gray mist, endless in all directions. Beneath his feet, the ground felt solid but unseen. The world had become a dream, or perhaps something older than dreams. From the fog, shapes began to form. At first, they were only silhouettes, armored figures, knights like himself. But as they drew nearer, Roland recognized their faces, men whose portraits he had seen in the castle's great hall, the ancient Grand Knights of Blackthorn. Their armor gleamed faintly, their eyes unreadable beneath visors. The leader among them stepped forward. His voice was like a distant echo, both solemn and kind. You have awakened the heart, Sir Roland, but to guard it, you must face what guards you. The mist shifted again, and before Roland appeared another figure, his own reflection, dressed in identical armor, yet darker, his sword drawn, his expression grim. Roland's pulse thundered in his ears. He realized at once what this was, the trial of shadows, the test spoken of in the scroll, where the knight faced the shadow of his own name.
The double spoke first. You dream of honor, it said, its voice sharp and cold. Yet you feel failure more than dishonor. You guard the castle not for the vow, but for your pride. Roland felt a jolt of anger. That is not true, he said firmly. The shadow circled him like a predator. Is it not? You read the chronicles and think yourself wiser than those who came before. You seek the relic not for faith, but for glory, to be remembered. The words struck deep. Roland's grip on his sword tightened. He wanted to deny it, but the shadow's voice echoed his own inner doubts. He had always wanted to prove himself worthy, to be part of the legends he admired. But had that pride blinded him? He lowered his sword slowly. Perhaps I have sought glory, he admitted. But I have learned from what I found. The relic is not mine to keep. It belongs to all who serve the night. I am only its steward. The shadow stopped. Its blade trembled. Then, slowly, it lowered its weapon. The mist brightened around them, and the figure began to fade.
"Then you have seen," said the echoing voices of the ancient knights. "You have faced the shadow, and it no longer rules you." The gray fog dissolved into light, warm, golden light like dawn spreading across a horizon. Roland felt a deep calm settle over him, as if the weight he had carried since arriving at Castle Blackthorn had finally lifted. The world steadied, and when he opened his eyes again, he was back in his chamber. The torches burned low, and the first pale gleam of morning touched the stone wall. His armor lay beside his bed, gleaming faintly as if newly polished. The relic's hum was gone, but in his chest he felt its rhythm, steady, quiet, eternal. He rose, walked to the window, and looked out over the sleeping castle. He had faced his fear, his pride, his shadow. He was no longer merely a knight on watch. He was the watch itself, the living continuation of the Brotherhood's ancient vow. "In darkness I have seen, and in silence I will remember." The dawn broke over Castle Blackthorn, and for the first time in many nights, Sir Roland smiled, not in triumph, but in peace.
The morning after the trial of shadows was unlike any other. The sun rose slowly over Castle Blackthorn, its light spilling softly through frost-rimmed windows. For the first time in months, the air felt warm. The long silence that had enveloped the castle seemed to lift, as if the very stones had exhaled. Sir Roland moved quietly through the corridors, still feeling the afterglow of his vision. His thoughts were clearer, his spirit lighter. But one question lingered. What had happened to the last Grand Knight, the one who had sealed the relic away centuries ago? The records of the Brotherhood spoke of a man named Sir Aldrich of Thornvale, the final bearer of the Grand Oath. Aldrich had been known for his wisdom, yet his story ended abruptly. The chronicles simply stopped mentioning him. No grave, no farewell. Only a brief entry written by an unknown scribe. "The Watcher has returned to the light." That phrase haunted Roland. It was poetic, but ambiguous. Did Aldrich die? Disappear? Or transcend somehow beyond the reach of ordinary men? Determined to know, Roland returned once more to the hidden library. The chamber greeted him like an old friend. The scent of parchment and dust, the dim glow of his lantern painting golden arcs on the shelves. He searched the farthest corners, opening books whose pages had not been turned in centuries. Finally, tucked inside a small wooden coffer beneath a pile of scrolls, he found a leather-bound journal. Its cover bore the sigil of a single star enclosed by a thorned ring, the personal crest of Sir Aldrich. The first entries were formal, daily reports, oaths renewed, records of council. But as Roland read on, the tone changed. Aldrich's words grew introspective, philosophical. He wrote of dreams in which he walked through light that had no source, of voices calling him beyond the castle walls, of a summons from the heart. The relic grows restless. It hums in the stillness of the night, as though it remembers me. Perhaps it seeks to return whence it came. In later pages, Aldrich described a journey to the depths of the keep, the same chamber Roland had recently discovered. His handwriting grew faint, uneven, as though written by trembling hands. "I have seen it," the final entry said. "The heart is not of this earth. It is made from the silence between breaths, from the space between stars. Its light is truth, too bright for the waking mind. I go now to guard it, not as man, but as watch itself. Should another awaken it, tell him, the heart does not belong to the living, it belongs to the night." Roland sat back, breathless. The words shimmered with a strange power, and as he read them aloud, a faint breeze stirred through the library. The lantern's flame flickered, casting long shadows on the shelves.
And then he saw it. At the edge of the light, a figure in armor, standing motionless between the stacks. The air shimmered around it, translucent but real. It was not threatening, only watching. The figure's eyes glowed faintly, calm and knowing. In that moment, Roland understood. Sir Aldrich had never died. He had become part of the castle, its watcher, its guardian, bound to the relic and the oath he had sworn. The apparition inclined its head slightly, as if acknowledging Roland's understanding. Then it faded, dissolving into the air like mist in morning sunlight. The silence that followed was not empty. It was serene, filled with quiet meaning. Roland closed the journal gently and returned it to its coffer. He felt no fear, only reverence. As he ascended the stairway back toward the chapel, the dawn light grew stronger. Every step felt lighter, as though the weight of centuries had lifted from the castle itself. At the top of the stairs, he paused and looked back. "Rest well, Grand Knight. Your watch is kept." Outside, the bell of the eastern tower rang, a soft, solemn tone that rolled through the cold air like a heartbeat. The castle answered with stillness, the kind that belongs not to endings, but to peace. And that night, when Roland finally lay down to sleep, he dreamed not of battles or relics, but of light, gentle, endless, and calm, spreading over the walls of Castle Blackthorn.
The next morning dawned softly over the valley. The mists that always clung to the moat drifted away like ghosts returning to rest. For the first time in generations, the air within Castle Blackthorn felt lighter. There was something almost musical about it. The way sunlight touched the old stones. The way every sound seemed to echo a little more warmly. Sir Roland awoke before the others. He rose slowly, feeling as though he had slept 100 peaceful years. For the first time since his knighthood began, there was no tension in his shoulders. His heart was still, his mind unburdened. He walked toward the chapel, where morning light filtered through colored glass. The great window at the far end depicted Saint Michael the Protector, sword raised, wings outstretched. But today, Roland noticed something new. In the glass, faintly, a second figure appeared behind the saint, a tall knight, cloaked in shadow and light. It hadn't been there before. Roland stood silently before it, his breath fogging the cool air. He whispered to himself, "Aldrich." It was as if the castle had remembered him. Soon the bells rang, summoning the Brotherhood to their morning council. The knights gathered in the great hall, their armor catching the dawn like liquid gold. They looked different, too, less wary, more awake. Even the youngest among them, Sir Thomas, who had always struggled to stand through the long vigils, seemed steadier now. Roland addressed them not as a commander, but as a brother. "My friends," he began, his voice echoing softly, "we have spent years guarding shadows, defending something we did not understand. But last night I saw the truth of our calling. The relic we protect is not a weapon. It is a mirror. It reflects what we carry within ourselves, and it shows that peace, not power, was always our purpose." Murmurs filled the room. Sir Gareth, ever skeptical, rose and asked, "Then what of the oath? What of our watch?" Roland smiled gently. "The watch continues, but not as before. We will no longer guard against enemies outside these walls. We will guard against the darkness within. Our watch is of the soul." The knights looked to one another, uncertain. But then, from the back of the hall, came an unexpected sound. A voice, aged, cracked, but steady. It was Brother Elric, the oldest of them all.
"I have waited my whole life to hear those words," he said. "When I was a squire, my master told me the true duty of a knight is not battle,
but balance. The sword and the heart must weigh the same. It seems we have found that weight again. Silence followed. Then, one by one, the knights stood and bowed their heads, not in submission, but in renewal. That evening, the brotherhood gathered in the courtyard under a rising silver moon. They removed their helmets and set them upon the stone steps. Roland led them in quiet prayer, not of conquest, but of peace. "Let the night watch over us," he intoned softly. "Let our dreams be gentle, and our hearts remain true. May the relic sleep as we sleep, and may the light return when it is called." When he finished, a wind stirred through the courtyard. The relic, hidden deep below, seemed to hum faintly, as if in agreement. And from the highest tower a bell rang once, slow and clear, without a hand to pull the rope. No one spoke. They simply listened as the sound drifted away into the stars. Later that night, Roland returned alone to the battlements. The sky above was alive with constellations, bright and endless. Somewhere among them, he imagined Sir Aldrich standing watch, his spirit forever bound to the castle's calm. Roland whispered into the night, "The watch continues." And from the darkness, so faintly he almost thought he dreamed it, came a reply, gentle as breath, "Then all is well."
A few weeks passed since the renewal of the watch. The days were filled not with drills or marches, but with quiet rebuilding. The castle had begun to change, subtly, as if the stones themselves were remembering how to breathe. Sir Roland walked the old eastern wing, once sealed off after a fire centuries ago. Dust lay thick over the floors, but beneath it, the patterns of carved marble were still visible, intricate knots and stars. As light streamed through the narrow windows, the air filled with soft motes that danced like embers. It was here that Roland decided to build something new. Not an armory, not a war room, but a sanctuary, a place where knights could lay down their arms and simply reflect. They called it the Hall of Quiet Light. For days, the Brotherhood worked together. They cleared the ruins, polished the old stones, and rebuilt the arched ceiling. Brother Elric painted faint constellations across the dome, each star placed to match the night sky above the castle. Sir Gareth, once the most battle-hardened of them all, now spent his evenings carving wooden benches by hand. Even the youngest squires joined in, their laughter echoing softly in the vast chamber. When it was finished, the hall glowed in candlelight, a circular room filled with warmth, the air fragrant with beeswax and cedar. Roland placed something at the center, a small crystal shard from the relic itself. Not enough to awaken it, only enough to cast a soft, eternal shimmer that would never fade. That night, the knights gathered inside for the first vigil in centuries, not held in fear, but in peace. "This is our new watch," Roland said softly, his voice echoing under the dome. "We will guard silence, not shadows, light, not fire." And for the first time in living memory, the Brotherhood slept within the same hall, unarmored, unguarded, and unafraid. Outside, snow began to fall gently over the battlements, each flake glinting like a promise. The castle dreamed with them. Winter deepened. The fire in the great hearth never went out, and the walls of Castle Blackthorn held the warmth like a living thing. During these long nights, Sir Roland turned to another task, preserving what had been learned. In the archives, beneath layers of dust and centuries of neglect, he found a set of blank manuscripts bound in doeskin.
He began writing, not reports or oaths, but reflections. His handwriting flowed slow and steady across the parchment, like the speech of someone who had finally found the right words. He called the book The Whispering Quill. In it, he wrote of the trials, the relic, Sir Aldrich's sacrifice, and the renewal of the watch. But he also wrote of dreams, how the knights slept now with peace instead of tension, how their dreams were filled with calm fields, rivers, and stars. He wrote, too, of sounds that only silence could reveal, the breath of the castle, the creak of oak that marked the hours, the whisper of snow falling against the old stone. "We once believed peace was a reward," one entry read, "but it is not. It is a craft, something built, tended, and kept alive like a flame. It must be guarded not by swords, but by hearts that remember how to rest." The other knights began to visit the library at night. They would sit quietly as Roland wrote, adding their own memories, small details, jokes, lessons learned in the dark. What began as one book grew into many, each bearing the name of its author. The archives became alive again, filled with stories instead of strategies. And when the snow melted at last, spring sunlight spilled through the high windows, glimmering across the pages like a benediction.
Spring brought visitors. Pilgrims came from distant villages, drawn by tales of the knights who no longer fought. They came expecting relics, miracles, or secrets of immortality. Instead, they found open gates and warm smiles. Roland welcomed them not as supplicants, but as guests. He led them through the hall of quiet light, showing them where warriors now meditated, where swords rested in peace beside candles and flowers. Among the visitors was a child, a small girl who carried a feather instead of a coin for her offering. When Roland asked why, she said, "Because feathers are what dreams use to fly." He smiled and took the feather gently. He placed it beside the crystal shard at the hall's center. "Then let it fly here," he said. That night, as he walked the corridors, he heard something unusual. Not the hum of the relic, nor the wind. It was a soft lullaby. Someone singing in the chapel. Following the voice, he found Brother Elric kneeling before the altar, eyes closed. The song was one of peace, a melody once sung by squires before their first watch. When it ended, Elric looked up and said, "The dreams are returning." "Whose dreams?" Roland asked. "All of ours," Elric replied. "The castle dreams now, and it remembers." That night, everyone slept more deeply than ever before, and in the quietest hour, when the moonlight touched every wall, the feather the child had brought lifted slightly into the air, glowing faintly, as if it too dreamed.
By early summer, Castle Blackthorn stood like a sleeping giant surrounded by emerald hills. The sound of birdsong replaced the clang of steel. Even the wind carried a tone of peace. Yet beyond the valley, word had spread far and wide about the knights who no longer fought. Merchants spoke of them in taverns, monks in cloisters, and travelers whispered their legend beside evening fires. Some called it a miracle, others a surrender. But one man heard the tale and knew it for what it truly was, a calling. He came from the east, across the sea, wearing a long cloak of faded crimson and carrying no weapon. His name was Tariq ibn Nasir, a scholar from Cordoba, who had spent decades studying the lost relics of Christendom and the East. His beard was streaked with white, his eyes sharp and kind. When he arrived at the castle gate, the guards, still unaccustomed to strangers, hesitated. But when Roland came to meet him, Tariq bowed low and said softly, "I have walked far to find the place where peace sleeps." Roland smiled, understanding immediately that this was no ordinary traveler. He welcomed him into the great hall where sunlight poured through stained glass and painted the floor in ribbons of color. Over cups of spiced wine, Tariq told his story. He spoke of old manuscripts that spoke of a heart of the world, a relic of unknown origin, said to appear in times when mankind had forgotten stillness. "Your relic," Tariq said, "is not made by men or angels. It is made by silence itself, a shard of the world before sound." Roland listened, transfixed. Tariq went on, "The last record I found speaks of a brotherhood who took an oath not to wield the heart, but to protect the dream that birthed it. The oath was not to guard a thing, but a state of being. That dream, I believe, lives here still." For the first time in years, Roland felt both wonder and humility. Tariq's words filled the air with reverence. As night fell, the two men stood together on the ramparts, watching the moon rise. The castle glowed like silver beneath the stars. "Then it seems," Roland said, "our watch has not been for the relic, but for the silence within us all." Tariq nodded, "And that silence," he replied, "is the world's oldest prayer."
Tariq stayed through the summer, becoming a quiet presence within the Brotherhood. He was no knight, yet everyone began calling him the silent teacher. His lessons were not of scripture or war, but of listening. One morning, he led the knights beyond the castle to a hidden glen where a small pond lay so still it reflected the sky perfectly. "This," he said, "is the mirror of still water. Look, and you will see the face the world shows only to those who do not move." The knights peered into the pond. At first they saw only their reflections, but slowly, as they quieted their breathing, the images began to shift. The ripples faded. Their faces disappeared, replaced with stars, clouds, and endless depth. Roland whispered, "It feels alive." Tariq smiled faintly. "It is. The same stillness lives inside the relic and inside each of you. The heart of the world is not one stone. It is every moment when the heart rests, without fear." For hours they sat in silence, watching light move across the water. When they finally rose, it was with a sense of renewal so deep that no words could follow. That night, Roland wrote again in the whispering quill. "The relic does not glow from within the earth. It glows from within us. We are the keepers of its reflection. And perhaps, when the world forgets again, it will awaken, not to remind us of power, but of peace." From that day onward, every knight visited the pond before taking their vow. The watch had changed once more. They no longer swore to defend the castle walls, but to defend the silence that made life sacred. And as the stars deepened above, the pond reflected them perfectly, untouched, eternal.
But peace, like all fragile things, soon drew the eyes of those who could not understand it. Far beyond the valley, in the walled cities of the north, lords began to speak of Castle Blackthorn with suspicion. "Knights who refuse to fight," they said, "it is unnatural. They must hide something." Rumors twisted the truth into fear. Some claimed the relic was a weapon being secretly forged. Others said the knights had fallen under a spell. When autumn came, a messenger arrived from the king himself, bearing an order. The Brotherhood of the Watch was to appear before the royal council to account for their actions. Roland read the seal in silence. The hall was quiet. Every face turned toward him. "Will you go?" asked Sir Gareth. Roland looked toward the hall of quiet light where the feather still lay beside the crystal shard. "Yes," he said softly, "but not to defend ourselves, to remind them of what peace sounds like." Before he left, Tariq approached him. "If they cannot hear you," he said gently, "then show them silence. It is stronger than any speech." Roland nodded, and as he rode from the castle gates, dawn breaking behind him, he looked back once to see the towers bathed in golden light. The bells rang softly, not a warning, but a blessing. And in that moment, even the wind seemed to whisper, "The world is listening."
The journey to the royal city took 7 days. The road wound through forests that whispered in the wind, past ruins of watchtowers that once marked the edge of wars long ended. Roland rode alone, wearing no armor, only a simple cloak bearing the sigil of the Brotherhood, a single white star within a circle. When he reached the city, he found it loud and restless. Merchants shouted in the markets. The ring of hammers filled the air. It was a world that had forgotten stillness. The king's council gathered in the Hall of Banners, a vast chamber lined with shields, trophies, and echoes of power. The king himself was a stern man of 50 winters, his crown more burden than glory. He studied Roland with narrowed eyes. "Sir Roland of Blackthorn," the king began, "you and your knights have broken the ancient code. You refuse to serve in battle. You reject my summons, and you harbor relics whose nature is not known to us. Explain yourself before the crown decides your fate." Roland bowed deeply. "Your Majesty," he said, voice calm, "we have not broken the code. We have remembered it. The oath of a knight is not to war, but to honor, to defend peace where it may yet live. We have chosen to keep that peace alive." A murmur rippled through the council. One lord rose angrily. "Peace is not kept by silence, Sir Knight. It is earned by victory." Roland turned toward him, eyes steady. "Then tell me, my lord, how many victories will it take before you rest?" The hall fell silent. Even the king shifted in his seat. Roland continued, "We built walls to protect ourselves, but forgot the heart that beats within them. The relic we guard is not a weapon. It is a reminder of the world before fear, and that reminder is all we have left to keep us human." For a long moment no one spoke. Then the king, weary yet thoughtful, leaned forward. "You speak of this relic as if it breathes." Roland smiled faintly. "It does, not with breath, but with silence. It teaches what words cannot." At that, something in the king's expression softened. He waved his hand. "Leave us, Sir Roland. I must think on what you have said." As Roland turned to go, the king asked quietly, "And if I forbid your order, if I command your relic destroyed?" Roland paused. "Then peace will move elsewhere, Majesty. It cannot be destroyed, only forgotten." And with that, he bowed once more and walked from the hall, leaving behind a silence so deep that even the banners seemed to stop moving. When Roland returned to Castle Blackthorn, the knights awaited him in the courtyard. He told them all that had passed, and though some feared retribution, Roland's calm was unshaken. "The king has heard the truth," he said. "Whether he accepts it is not ours to decide. We are not keepers of his heart, only our own." That night, as twilight painted the sky in violet and silver, the relic stirred beneath the keep. For centuries it had lain dormant, its light dim. Now, for reasons none could explain, it began to glow once more. Roland and the others descended into the chapel vault to find it, softly pulsing, as if breathing with the rhythm of the earth itself. The glow filled the chamber, painting every surface in hues of blue and gold. Brother Elric knelt before it, tears in his eyes. "It knows," he whispered. "It knows what you have done." The relic's hum deepened. Then, for the first time in living memory, it emitted a low tone, like a heartbeat. The air shimmered. On the stone walls, shapes appeared. Visions of knights, peasants, and children, all dreaming, all at peace. Tariq stood beside Roland, eyes wide. "This is the truth," he murmured. "The relic is not a gift to the knights alone. It is the world's dream of rest. You have awakened it." Roland approached the relic and knelt. "Then let it rest again, but let its light remain with us." The tone faded, and the glow settled into a steady, soft radiance that filled the chamber but did not blind. It was the light of understanding, of forgiveness, of peace renewed. When they rose, every knight felt lighter, as though 1,000 years of burden had lifted from their shoulders. Above them, the bells began to ring on their own, slow, tender, eternal.
In the days that followed, a strange thing happened. Word of the glowing relic spread again, but this time not through rumor. Those who visited the castle spoke not of miracles or magic, but of a peace that settled over them the moment they crossed the gates. Farmers came to rest in the courtyard after their day's work. Travelers stayed to listen to the quiet. Even birds seemed to sing more softly. And then one morning, without command or summons, men and women began to walk from distant towns toward the valley. They carried no banners, no weapons, only candles. They called it the Silent March. From the battlements, the knights watched in awe as thousands moved slowly up the winding path, their candles flickering like stars. They came not to worship, but to share the quiet. Roland met them at the gate, his voice a whisper carried by the wind. "Welcome home," he said. That night the Hall of Quiet Light could not hold them all, so they filled the courtyard, the gardens, the walls. The air was thick with stillness, glowing from countless flames. And when midnight came, something miraculous occurred. The relic's light rose gently through the stone floors, joining with the candlelight, spreading through every hall, every chamber, until the entire castle glowed softly under the moon. No one spoke, no one moved. For a single, eternal hour, the world seemed to exhale. And in that silence, the heart of the world beat, slow, steady, and kind. The Silent March became more than an event. It became a tradition. Each year, when the summer moon was at its fullest, people from every kingdom traveled to Castle Blackthorn, carrying candles to honor the peace that had taken root there. The knights no longer called themselves warriors, they called themselves keepers. Their armor remained polished, not for battle, but as mirrors of light. On the first anniversary of the relic's awakening, the castle was surrounded by an ocean of flickering flames. The valley shimmered as though stars had fallen to earth. From the highest tower, Roland looked out over the sea of light, his eyes glistening. Beside him stood Tariq, smiling faintly. "When I was young," he said, "I dreamed of finding proof that peace could outlast the sword. Tonight, I think I have seen it." Roland placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, tonight you've helped build it." Below, Brother Eldrick began to sing, a soft, ancient melody without words. One by one, voices joined him, until the whole valley hummed with a sound deeper than music. It was a vibration of shared stillness. The relic responded. Its glow rose gently from beneath the castle, shimmering up through the stone, joining with the candlelight. For an instant, every person in the valley saw it, the same dream, a world without fear, where even shadows rested easily. And then the glow faded, leaving behind only warmth and silence.
When the song ended, Roland whispered to those around him, "This is the true watch, not to guard, but to remember." That night, no one slept because they needed to. They slept because they wanted to dream, to keep the relic's light alive inside their hearts.
Years passed. The valley thrived in peace. The knights aged gracefully, their hair silver, their steps slow but steady. The relic's light never dimmed. One morning, as dawn broke pale over the hills, Tariq's chambers were found empty. On his writing desk lay a single folded parchment sealed with wax and a feather pressed into it, the same kind once left by the child in the hall of quiet light. Roland opened the letter in silence. It was written in Tariq's elegant script. "My dearest brothers, I have seen the dream fulfilled. I go now to follow where silence leads me next. Remember this: peace is not kept by those who hold it, but by those who share it. When words fail, listen. When the world grows loud again, as it surely will, let this castle stand not as a fortress, but as a whisper, reminding men how to rest. You were never meant to guard the relic. You were meant to become it." Tariq ibn Nasir. Roland read it aloud to the knights gathered in the hall. None wept, though every eye shone with quiet reverence. They held a vigil that night beneath the stars. As the candles flickered, a warm wind swept through the valley. Some swore they heard a voice in it, a soft, familiar whisper, "The world still dreams." Roland smiled, lifting his eyes toward the horizon. "Rest well, teacher. Your lesson remains."
Time flowed on. Roland grew old, his beard white as snow, but his eyes still bright. The relic's hum remained constant, steady as a heartbeat. One evening he walked alone through the hall of quiet light. The feather still lay beside the crystal, untouched by age. The benches gleamed in the candlelight. He thought of Aldrich, of Tariq, of all who had walked these corridors before him. He knew his time was near, and so he did what every true knight must. He prepared his last watch. He sat before the crystal and spoke softly. "I have seen war end and silence begin. I have seen the world remember what it forgot. If I have one wish left, it is this: that peace does not depend on us, but on those who listen after we are gone." As the night deepened, the relic's light grew brighter. Roland's breath slowed. His eyes closed. And in the stillness that followed, the knights found him at dawn, sitting upright, calm and smiling, his hand resting upon the relic's edge. They buried him beneath the old oak in the courtyard, the same tree under which he had first taken his vow. On his grave, they carved no title, no name, only 3 words: "The watch continues." That night, the relic glowed softly once more, not in grief, but in gratitude.
Centuries passed. The wars of men came and went. Kingdoms rose, fell, and were forgotten. But high in the misty hills of the old north, the ruins of Castle Blackthorn still stood. Travelers who found it said they could feel warmth in its stones, even in winter. Some claimed to hear faint music within the empty halls. And every year, when the moon was full, wildflowers bloomed in the courtyard in perfect circles of light. Villagers nearby told stories to their children, stories of knights who learned to dream instead of fight, of a relic that glowed with the silence of the stars, and of a feather that never aged.
They called it the dream that endured. One night, centuries after Roland's time, a wandering historian sat by the ruins, writing by moonlight. He felt the ground hum faintly beneath him. Looking down, he saw a glow seeping through the cracks in the stone, a pulse, faint but alive. He smiled, set down his pen, and whispered, "The watch continues." Far beneath, where time no longer mattered, the relic's light answered with a single, gentle heartbeat. And for a moment, just before sleep took him, he thought he heard the faint sound of armor stirring, a soft voice saying, "Rest now, traveler, the night is kind." Then all was quiet again. The stars shone on, patient and eternal, and peace, once more, slept within the walls of Blackthorn.